Hi everyone and welcome. Today we're joined again by Alex Krainer, a market analyst, author, and also a former hedge fund manager. So welcome back to the program.
Thank you for the invite, Glenn. Good to be with you, and greetings to your viewers and listeners.
So we have a situation which appears to get more complex. That is, in this fight in Eurasia, in which the Americans define the Chinese as their main opponent, we're nonetheless, we're fighting Russia through the Ukrainian proxy, a war which we're losing. Iran is also, of course, been attacked directly by Israel. I suspect that the next round there might be indirect attacks, be it Syria or Azerbaijan or something. But this also, at least the last round, appeared to be a loss. And we see the Iranians and Russians getting closer. So it's a confusing picture. I was wondering how you see this this dynamic between the Russians and Iranians. Do you see them getting closer because of this, or to what extent do you think they would actually come to each other's assistance?
I think that there's no question that they will be coming closer to each other's assistance, because they have each been targeted by let's call it Western Empire, and you know to make sense of what is going on, it's useful to always go back to what has been explained to us from the high priests of Davos at World Economic Forum, that it is a conflict between the two models of governance. And so this was something that George Soros explained in one of his annual speeches to Davos, to World Economic Forum. And in a way, he's correct. That is correct, but I think it's not two systems of governance. It's more the conflict between the Western neo-colonialist imperialistic system against pretty much everybody else. And I think that this Western neo-colonialist system of governance is predatory, and their overarching strategic imperative is to preserve and defend their hegemony over the Eurasian landmass. And in order to do this, they have to prevent any rival power from emerging on the Eurasian continent. And so, since the days of Halford Mackinder, they have formulated this as the pivot power, which they said a pivot power might emerge on Eurasian landmass, and then they could become a land-based empire, and that with time they could grow and become so powerful and wealthy that they could displace the maritime empire, which is what British Empire was at the time. And so Mackinder already 100 years ago proposed how to prevent the land-based empire, which they already had assumed that would be Russia, how to prevent it from emerging and becoming more powerful than the British Empire and displacing the British Empire in the world. And the recipe was to surround the pivot area with so many beachheads through which they could continuously impose wars on Russia, and continuously weaken Russia and drain it so that it can never become a major power to contend with. And Mackinder specifically named France, Italy, Egypt, and Korea as those beachheads, and India. Sorry, so France, Italy, Egypt, India, and Korea. But in the last 100 years, of course, the geostrategy has changed. So what we have today is pretty much the whole strip going from the going from the Baltic Sea down to the Eastern Mediterranean and then across two Koreas. So they've kind of seeded that whole strip with potential crisis flashpoints. And so we see today that they took advantage of Ukraine to impose a war to Russia. They have already designated the Balkans as the second front in the conflict between the West and Russia. Then, of course, the Middle East. They on 7 October 2023, the war in the Middle East escalated to a dangerous level. Their objective is clearly to take down the Iranian regime, which is again, in the service of them having hegemony over the Western Eurasian continent. We've seen that there was an attempt to get India and Pakistan into another war. We see just in the last week or so that the Azerbaijan has started antagonizing both Russia to the north and Iran to the south, and that Turkish deep state has been used to do the same, because what the imperials, let's call it by its name, what the British are trying to achieve is to defend their hegemony over the Eurasian landmass by taking the Turkish deep state as their proxy, and they have been promising them the creation of the Great Turania, which is basically the idea of uniting economically and politically all the Turkic people between Turkey and pretty much China, because there you have, you go from Turkey eastwards, you have Azerbaijan, you have all the stans, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, all the way to the Chinese Xinjiang province, which is all populated by majority Turkic people. So to appeal to the Turkish deep state to collaborate with the Western Empire, they're promising them the creation of this great Turania, where somebody like Erdogan or maybe Aliyev in Baku could emerge as these great statesmen, uniters of the Turkic people under one leadership, to create a large, powerful political entity. But in the meantime, what they're asking of them is to serve their purposes. So we see now Azerbaijan antagonizing Russia, deliberately taking action to deteriorate the relationships, the relationship between Russia, cooperating with Western intelligence services and Israel to antagonize the Iranians. Then you have the whole region of northwest Iran, which is also populated by majority Turkic people, which is South Azerbaijan. So maybe, for Aliyev, the idea might be, hey, if we could destabilize Iran, and if we could regime change it, then maybe he could expand the scope, the size of Azerbaijan by annexing South Azerbaijan, taking part of the Iran's territory today. And let's not forget also that the Turks have collaborated with British intelligence on taking down the regime of Bashar al-Assad by cultivating HTS from the remnants of the al-Nusra's front and Al-Qaeda in Syria. Now we know fully well that those forces have been cultivated by the British intelligence agencies in cooperation with the Turkish deep state. So all these different crisis flashpoints, all these conflicts that are on the verge of emerging or that have already escalated, they all make part of the one and the same conflict. And then, if we go back to what George Soros told us, that's exactly what it is. It's the clash between two systems of governance. And I think that you could even take this a step further and you could say that it's the clash between Western Empire and the BRICS movement, because BRICS movement has emerged as an alternative to the Western Empire. So instead of countries being disunited, where, one by one they can be taken down through either terrorism or separatist movements or color revolution, political assassinations, actions like this, they unite and they create an alternative system where they can trade, they can cooperate, they can share defense and security provisions as they have done through Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And they know exactly what they're dealing with, because in recently, I think within the last year or two, Shanghai Cooperation Organization did publish a number of strategic documents in which they identified specifically the threat of terrorism, separatism, and political extremism as the most important threats to confront and defend against. And this is exactly the way Western powers have acted. They have acted through proxies, who are either terror organizations, separatist groups, or domestic extremists in target countries, whether we're talking about Myanmar or we're talking about Iran or we're talking about Syria or Ukraine. It's always one and the same thing, and the danger is that other flashpoint might emerge in the Baltic states, in the Balkans. There's also tensions between India and Bangladesh, which recently had a regime change as well, between Bangladesh and Myanmar, North Korea versus South Korea, and of course, China and Taiwan could also become a war front. So while it seems confusing if you go by day-to-day event, if you zoom out and you try to understand the strategy of the Western Empire and what they're trying to achieve, then you realize that all of these crises are different battlegrounds of the same exact war.
Yeah, what is fascinating in the longer historical framework, though, is that since the days of Mackinder in the early I think his first work came out in 1904 on this Eurasian landmass, how to control it, how central it's been in the strategic documents and the strategic thinking of Britain and thereafter the United States, the point where it comes up in the key strategic documents, that is, prevent Eurasian powers from coming together. So, but as you said, it means if you're gonna rule the Eurasian continent from the rimland, as the Americans say, or the maritime periphery, you do have to make sure that the Eurasian land powers are divided, which is a consistent theme, as you say. You have to keep the Germans split from the Russians, which was always the key British policy in Europe. But also you keep the Chinese from the Russians, the Iranians from the Chinese. They're essentially all split. But towards this end, I guess the weakness of the ability to split the Russians from the Germans or from Europe overall has always been Ukraine, as this was again the main bridge. You don't have this between the Russians and the Chinese, by the way. I think this is a key problem for American strategies. They have a vast border, and there's no disruptive middle state you can use. Yeah, Mongolia wouldn't work. But anyways, my question was, how do you see this working out now? Because the project Ukraine, the efforts of yes. So using the Ukrainians to, as the Americans often say, knock out the Russians from the ranks of great powers and permanently decouple it from Europe. This is not going as planned. This is indeed, I think it's the cascading effect. So the collapse appears to be intensifying. If we look over the past only a few days, of course, the American attempt or suspending the arms delivery, this can be reversed, tomorrow or later today. So this is, this can shift, but the Russian intensity becoming more aggressive in the bombing, the front line weakening. How do you see this, let's say Project Ukraine going forward from here? Because there has to be a plan B for the United States.
Well, okay. So my reading of the United States, and if we talk about the United States, of course we have to accept the premise that the United States is not a monolith. The United States came into being as a rejection of Western colonialism, as a reaction to it, and an attempt to establish a new free country. And so this is what the American Independence Day is celebrating. In fact, we just had the Independence Day yesterday. And in that sense, the United States, if it goes back to its Republican roots, their natural ally and friend in the world is exactly Russia. And during the whole of the 19th century and even in the 17th century, 18th century, Russia and the United States have been very, very close friends and allies. So the reasons for this are still valid and actual, and there are historical tradition which do bring these two countries together. So now the question is, does Trump administration want to continue being the military enforcement arm of the Western empire, or do they want to return to their Republican roots and just become a major power in their own hemisphere, while at the same time having friendly and constructive, mutually beneficial relationships with other powers like Russia, China, India, and so forth? And first of all, Donald Trump's statements on this subject have been very consistent, that he wants to extricate the United States from all these imperialist projects around the world. And then over the last 180 days or so that he's been president of the United States, his action has also been consistent in this respect. So not the rhetoric. The rhetoric will cause you brain injuries if you focus on that, but the actual effects of his policies. So, already in January, Marco Rubio, his foreign secretary, his Secretary of State, said that the United States actually regards the post-World War II order to be more than obsolete, that it has been weaponized against the United States, that it does not suit American interest, that the new reality is multipolar integrations, and that the United States intends to embrace those multipolar integrations. So the fact that we can see today the United States extricating itself from Project Ukraine, because the big lobbying push in March and April this year has been to maneuver the United States into providing security guarantees to Ukraine, and Trump has declined to do so. And now we see the United States ceasing weapons deliveries to Ukraine. Say it's a pause and they will continue. Well, maybe, but the information from the ground in Ukraine. I have a friend in Kiev who I speak to periodically. He told me there's no question about it. The Americans are walking. Everybody, everybody can tell. The most important weapon systems that the Ukrainians need today, they're no longer receiving them. The justification is we're running out. We don't have enough for ourselves. We have to do this. But the effect is that, in fact, Trump is letting the Russians take Ukraine, and Project Ukraine is finished now. They will, there's no question that Ukraine will be defeated. And the powers that are most anxious to preserve their foothold, the beachhead, as Mackinder would say, in Ukraine are France and Britain. And the relationships between France and Britain on the one hand and the Trump administration on the other have not been so friendly. Then there was a group, I forget if they had a name actually, under National Security Agency in the United States, and the group was brought together for the purpose of coming up with strategies how to continue to antagonize and destabilize Russia, how to coerce them into some kind of a peace that would be beneficial to Ukraine, even all the way up to staging terror attacks in Russia. Donald Trump, how do you call it? He dismissed the people on this group, and he discontinued their role in the United States. If we shift our attention to Iran, there was huge pressure on Trump to go to war against Iran. And that's a subject about that there's a deep rabbit hole about Iran there. Trump has, in his own way that seems very incoherent and chaotic, but in effect, he has avoided going to war against Iran. He launched a bombing attack, which didn't seem to achieve very much, which the Iranians were apparently aware of and warned about in advance, and which after which he said, okay, we've done it. It's no need to continue with vaporized Iranian nuclear program. So we won, and then that's the end of that. When asked about the regime change, he said, no, I don't want a regime change. In fact, he wanted to lift sanctions from Iran. He wanted to ease some sanctions off of Iran. And Steve Witkoff even went as far in an interview with one of these U.S. networks, ABC or someone like that. He said that lifting the sanctions from Iran was a signal to China, in fact, that the U.S. administration is ready to deal. And then days later, they announced that they had struck new trade deals with China. So, if I look at all these changes that we've seen in the world since Trump took over, they are very much consistent with the idea of abandoning the post-World War II global order, where the United States was basically the chief global cop which was enforcing militarily the dominance, the hegemony of the Western Empire around the world, and extricating the United States from all those wars, and then striking deals with sovereign nations like Russia, like China, like Iran also, and at the same time not pursuing a good path with the European powers, be it the EU, France, Britain, Canada. And in fact, if you read Western press, they absolutely hate Trump. There's not a day that goes by that they don't have an insulting article about Trump and his administration. I wanted to spend a minute more on Iran, because that's a very significant one, because the pressure on Trump to bomb Iran, we have just seen it. But there was a similar episode that played out in 2019. So in June of 2019, so practically 5 years ago, Iran shot down a U.S. Global Hawk drone over the Straits of Hormuz. And then there was a great campaign, a lobbying campaign aimed at Trump to launch a bombing campaign against Iran, which he declined. He said, "No, I will not do that." And then the side that reacted most hysterically to this was exactly the British embassy, and we got the Kim Derrick memo gate, because at the time the British ambassador to Washington was Sir Kim Derrick, who is now Lord Kim Derrick, and the organization called Anonymous leaked out these cables because he shot off a bunch of memos to the Foreign Office in London. And what we saw in that Foreign Office is that it was exactly the British embassy that was orchestrating this pressure campaign against Trump to kind of push the United States into war against Iran. And when Trump declined, Kim Derrick was very frustrated, very disappointed, and he issued some very undiplomatic criticism of Trump. And he said that, he was incompetent, chaotic, inept, and things like this. And he also said that, well, if we might still be able to maneuver Trump into attacking Iran, but we have to flood the zone around him. He used the word flood the zone. We have to flood the zone around him with more hawkish Trump whisperers that will persuade him to go to war. And then those cables got leaked out. And then on 9th July 2019, it was obvious that Trump was completely in the loop, that he knew what was going on. Trump published a tweet in which he called the British ambassador stupid and wacky. And the scandal behind the scenes became bad enough that the British had to recall Sir Kim Derrick and nominate a new ambassador to the United States. And I mentioned this incident because it largely went under the radar. The media didn't write a whole lot about this. They kind of obscured the episode, and but what we learned from the episode, that Trump knows exactly who is maneuvering the United States into these military misadventures everywhere around the world, and causing many of these wars. And again, it comes back to Mackinder's grand strategy, and the contemptuous use of the United States as the military enforcement for the empire.
I'm never sure how much of Trump is unqualified or narcissistic, and how much is clear strategic thinking, because often I think that's a weakness in Europe. I think we exaggerate the extent. I'm sure he's very narcissistic, but the extent to which this is what dictates the policy, I think the Europeans are making a mistake. I mean, and as you said, he must know what is going on. Indeed, one of the reasons why the French and the British were all for, at the end of 2024, of launching this long-range strikes into Russia, which they've known for past 3 years would be a disastrous escalation, was, they wanted to lock Trump into a war if once he took over power, or lock him into the Ukraine project. But and now, of course, they refer to him as, daddy, and this is supposed to, win him over with, by displaying our total and complete obedience. But here's the thing, that if you're in the United States, you see that Project Ukraine is failing, the war is going to be lost, it's going to be a disaster, much worse than Afghanistan. Imagine if you could unload that disaster on the Europeans. And I think this is what the Europeans are miscalculating. That is, the Europeans seem to think, the more they accept to take responsibility for Ukraine, the less burden on the U.S., the more likely it will continue this. But on the other hand, this makes it easier for the United States to wash its hands with it. So now it's Europe's problem. And it's same with this NATO summit. Everyone's accepting, 5% of GDP used for weapons. Of course, the Europeans are, cooking the books. They're putting infrastructure in, to bring it up to 5%. So it doesn't necessarily mean that much. But again, it's for Trump. It's if they arm themselves to show loyalty, hoping that America won't leave us, or Daddy won't leave us, as Rutte said. Instead, it allows America to leave, because now we said all of us are spending trillions on security now. Of course, or hundreds of billions now. America can go. So I think we might be underestimating the man in the White House. But what was the European? What is the eagerness then of the Europeans to? You mentioned especially the British to drag the Americans into a war with Iran. Is this the wider objective of keeping it in Europe, or how do you see this?
Well, it seems to me, and this is not spelled out exactly so everybody can take it into on board, but it seems to me that the British, at some point, and I think this happened when the Iron Curtain collapsed, in the early 90s, the British decided that they would try to reclaim their former imperial glory. And the first bit of evidence for this came in 1993 in a speech that Douglas Hurd, then the foreign secretary of Great Britain, foreign minister, he gave a speech to the parliament in which he said that Britain continues to punch above its weight, and that and as he said, we intend to pursue this role of, let's say, playing a disproportionately powerful role in global affairs. And then I think that they started pushing out to their former colonial possessions to take control again. Not by military conquest, but the way they do it is they have a very, very well developed intelligence network, which cooperates very closely with the Foreign Office, with let's call it a covert side of British diplomacy. And then they also ask to have a wide network of non-government organizations, private contractors and charities that go into these targeted countries, and they develop these networks of influence, and they use money, they use diplomatic pressure, and I think that the only time, and they use also, they develop influence with opposition, with terror networks, with separatist groups and so forth. And they seek to destabilize nations in this way, and then present themselves as savior. We're going to come here to ensure peace and stability in your nation. But then you get things like Syria, because they have been trying to bring peace and stability in Syria, and we've seen what happened there. They've done, if we go back to 2012, there was this famous exchange of messages between Jake Sullivan and Jonathan Powell. Jonathan Powell was formerly chief of staff to Tony Blair. And after ending his political career for a time, Jonathan Powell created this organization called Intermediate. It was one of these private contractors, which was funded by the Foreign Office and the MI6, and had close cooperation with them. And he recruited the current Syrian president, who was at the time in prison in Iraq. So somehow they got him out of prison in Iraq, and then they cultivated him. And at that time, he he communicated with Jake Sullivan, who was working for Hillary Clinton, and he told them that in Syria, Al Qaeda is on our side. So that's where we get the Jake Sullivan writing email to Hillary Clinton saying Al Qaeda is on our side, and he informed them that we have a wide network. We are in we have a relationship with all these insurgent armies in the region, and we work with them with the objective of overthrowing the Syrian regime. And in the same message exchange, he also informed Sullivan that the same operations have been put in place for Myanmar, Somalia, and Yemen. And what do these 4 countries have in common? That they have been at the receiving end of all these destabilizing attacks, terror attacks, civil wars, color revolutions, and so on, and millions upon millions of casualties. Just in Syria, since 2012, we've had over 1 million casualties. And one of the contractors involved, which were tasked with public relations in Syria, was called Albany Associates. And these same Albany Associates are now tasked with public relations work for the government of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is right there in the heart of the Balkans, which the British have designated as the next front against Russia. And their work, you can see the results of their work, because today, according to their polls, 60% of Bosnian people think that the greatest external threat to Bosnia is coming from Russia, exactly. So these, this is how they work. And then I think that the United States only comes into equation when the time comes to apply blunt force. When you need to bring carrier strike groups, launch missiles, bring troops. And I think that this is something that the American military, American defense establishment understand by now. So why am I saying all this? Because I think it's not just Trump. We're not dealing with Trump's wins. And I think that whether he's a great deep thinker and a strategist is secondary. I think that the important question is that the opposition to the empire and reluctance to be constantly waging wars for the empire is much more broad-based and much more robust in the American political class and especially among American military circles than just Donald Trump. And I think that this is how we got Donald Trump in the first place, because there's a lot of people in the United States who understand that from the World War II until now, the United States has been basically used in a master blaster combination, from Mad Max, where you had the master blaster was this big dumb giant with a little decrepit dwarf sitting on his shoulder, directing him what to destroy and whom to beat up. But the dumb giant didn't know why they were doing it. It was the little decrepit dwarf who was directing him all the time. And so there's a resentment for that. And I think there's a much more broad-based movement to bring the United States back to its Republican traditions, to reject the empire, and to become a regional power, a sovereign nation. And which is also why you see in the European circles this fear that the United States is going back to being isolationist, that they are not taking their global role seriously. Criticism how the United States had to be dragged into the World War I kicking and screaming, and how they came in late for World War II, and then how they withdrew from Afghanistan, they cut and run and so forth. But, while certain oligarchic circles in the United States want to preserve the imperial engagements because they were the top beneficiaries from it. I think a lot of people in the army, in the military, and in the political circles understand how they have been misused and abused, and they want nothing more to do with it. So I can't say, Trump doesn't come across as a great deep strategic thinker, but the effect of his policies definitely appears to be steering the ship of the United States away from the global empire.
Or just a last question, and then given that a lot of the how the U.S. deals with Ukraine, Iran, China, given that a lot of this depends on this, I guess, internal struggle within the U.S. Do you see the America firsters coming on top here, or if you assess, for example, what's happening in Ukraine, and also, did you think this is part of the reason behind the confusing rhetoric? Because if you're Trump, you can't. Let's say you do want to end the Ukraine war, and I do think that he does. He can't be too open about it. I mean, for example, with Reagan, I think he was the only one who will be able to actually begin negotiating an end to the Cold War, because no one would accuse him of being soft. I mean, if you expose yourself as being weak, then the others come for you. So often it's only the hawks which are able to, I guess, properly negotiate with the opponent. So, but from his perspective, is a lot of this back and forth, belligerent rhetoric? Is this just always personality, or do you see this being tied into the need to keep some of the the hawks at bay? Because a lot of this appears, as you said, it's not one united entity. There's a lot of internal struggles within America.
I do believe so, Glenn, and I can't be sure because the rhetoric is obviously part of the psyops, and the nature of psyops is that it has to keep the public disoriented and confused. So nobody can say like, well, this is exactly what they're doing, and I know this because they put it in this document.
Yeah.
Some of the most important decisions that are ever taken are never put down on paper. So, whatever somebody wrote somewhere in some document may or may not form the foundation for policy, but there will always be decisions that are taken in closed circles, where somebody decide, okay, we're going to be dropping Ukraine. That's it. They're not going to issue a press release for that. They're going to tread, like a course of giving themselves justifications, because they're always going to be attacked from the other side. Oh, you're abandoning our traditional allies.
Yeah.
And those traditional allies are very powerful. They control the media. They control so many of these institutions that are practically culturally entrenched in the American society. Back in the beginning of World War II, the British were deliberately inviting German attacks, the bombing attacks. And Winston Churchill was saying to the American ambassador, well, when the Germans start bombing our cities, you Yanks are not going to be able to sit back and let us be bombed, because, some of these towns bear the same names as towns in the United States. This is like Hitler bombing you in indirectly. So they understand, there's an entrenched mindset in the American political establishment, and as well, and also in the cultural traditions of the last, through the whole post World War II period, where ordinary person in the street thinks of the United Kingdom as an American friend and ally. Same for France, Europe, the European Union. So you can't just push them overboard, say, I'm not with these people anymore. I'm going to drop Ukraine. I'm going to be friends with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, because Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping has been demonized in the Western media nonstop since the beginning. I mean, Vladimir Putin has been in power since 2000. It was only in about 2003 that the Western powers understood that Putin was not not Zelensky, that he was not Boris Yeltsin, that he intended to defend Russian sovereignty. But since that time on, he has been demonized in Western media 24/7, nonstop. There's, it's hard to find even a moderately balanced approach to explaining Vladimir Putin. And so, Trump can just say, well, I'm going to make best friends with all these evil dictators like Putin and Xi Jinping and the mullahs sitting in Tehran. So the rhetoric, I think, has to be disorienting and confusing, which is why I try to actually ignore the rhetoric and then focus on what actually gets done and what are the effects of the policy. And I think that we also have a good precedent for that, which was from Donald Trump's first term. We had the evolving relations with North Korea, which started with very ugly rhetoric. You thought at one point that Trump was on the verge of launching an attack against North Korea. But at the very same time, he sent a delegation of his, from the Pentagon. I think it was high-level military generals who went to China and I think to South Korea and Singapore to prepare the terrain for a meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un. And they had a meeting and they ended up having a very good relationship. And Trump announced that, that they're friends, that the relationship will improve. And his objective was to end the hostility between North and South. And then for the first time since the Korean War, we had South Korean and North Korean troops demining the demilitarization zone. Of course, this was all derailed very quickly. But let's say that we had a window of time when there was really high hopes that the Korean Peninsula was going to be pacified for permanently. The rhetoric was one thing. The actual policy was something else. And I think that it's for the same reason that we have crazy and chaotic rhetoric going on today. But we need to focus on the results and on the effects of Trump's policy. And I think that so far, I give him the benefit of the doubt for sure.
I was gonna say it's very interesting take though. Because people keep referring to the rhetoric that you have to look beyond the noise, and so I'm always wondering. Well, I guess might be the purpose to make you keep guessing. But if there's some order in the chaos, or if it's just if there's nothing there, but as you said, there is certain consistency, at least in terms of Project Ukraine. So it does appear that, well, if you look beyond all the back and forth, what really has happened is that the Europeans have been sidelined. The Ukrainians increasingly keep in mind that they weren't even going to talk to the Russians, and now they're sitting at the table. They're increasingly going towards that format. The war, I guess, will now come to an end. The Europeans are taking over responsibility. So everything that he wanted is coming, and also, of course, the internal rivalry in the United States, the very powerful forces who won't let him walk away from the Ukraine war. They are also pacified to some extent. So again, I'm not sure if he's excellent at statecraft or he's just stumbling around, and this is happens by coincidence. So I would like to think there's there's skill behind here.
Yes, and I think that we also shouldn't neglect the fact that the war in the Middle East didn't escalate in the way that I think the war hawks hoped that it would. In spite of the the Americans bombing Iran, and then Iran launching a token retaliatory attack, it didn't escalate from there. And I think that took deliberate action, because if you just let things go by their inertia, the war would have escalated for sure. So it seems to me there's definitely someone behind Trump, and maybe Trump himself, that is trying to steer the ship away from war and towards something else. And so we'll see. They could get derailed. He might fail, because I think, if I could issue a serious criticism to Trump, he is too promiscuous with truth. I think that he did himself a disfavor by claiming that he completely demolished Iran's nuclear program, because it's a lie that's too easy to debunk, or at least it's too easy for one side of the political spectrum to say, no, it's not true, you're lying. Had he said, we have inflicted severe damage on the program, and now we will push the Iranians to allow our inspectors to verify, you would give yourself a few weeks or maybe even a few months where you could let that story kind of die away, move away from the radar screen. And under cover of these inspections, you could still negotiate and do deals with the Iranians. But if you go with such a completely bombastic lie, then a lot of people are just simply not going to believe you. And then the pressure to go back to bombing and to renew hostilities is going to start mounting immediately. So I think that in that sense, maybe he's making a mistake, but it's hard to judge. It's very easy to be the backseat driver, criticize what is being done. I think we have to just wait and see what happens. But at least we don't have a major nuclear confrontation going on in the Middle East, which is what the war hawks, I think, wanted, and they still want it.
Because this word, I mean, he's really stuck on it. I saw him, bashing CNN because he said it's not severely damaged, obliterated. This is the word, obliterated. So he wants his something everyone can agree on. He's a great salesman. Like, he does the showmanship. I mean, this is his thing. And this word, I think promoting it is very important. It's
very important,
because
the
accept
reason
that there's no nuclear program. Yeah.
Yes, the reason why he's insisting on this word is because Iran's nuclear program has been the justification for going to war against Iran, for bombing them. And so if you say that the thing is obliterated, now there's no justification. And, the Western powers, since, we're all about democracies and human rights and freedom, we can't openly say, well, actually, no, we want to democratically impose a new regime on Iran, and we want to install our Shah there at the point of a gun. So by saying that he obliterated it, he completely removes the pretext for war against Iran. We'll see what they end up achieving. But I give Trump and his government the benefit of the doubt, and I think that the only way we will be able to know for sure is with the passage of time. And rhetoric, again, has to be probably ignored for the best, for health reasons.
It's always fascinating to speak with you. So thank you so much for your time. And where can people find you?
Thank you for having me, Glenn. I'm active on X. My handle is @nakedhedgy. And I have 2 publications of Substack. One of them is a daily market newsletters with providing trend following signals for about 18 or so global markets. And I have a personal publication called Alex Krainer's Trend Compass, where I publish less frequently, but maybe more better research and more refined articles. The first one is iSystem Trend Compass. The second one is Alex Krainer's Substack.
Okay. Well, again, I can't recommend it enough. Go follow Alex Krainer. So Thank you so much again.
Thank you for having me, Glenn, and have an excellent weekend.